that Landorus Therian. So already one Kyogre Zacian pair to go on stage right here.
Absolutely, and Austin running the Calyrex Groudon, which we were talking about earlier, and dual Gigantamax forms in Venusaur as well as the Charizard. So taking a quick look at Andrew's accomplishments here, Collinsville Regional Champion, as you mentioned. Andrew actually only started playing in, I believe, 2018 or 2019, so he's relatively new to the scene, but has had a meteoric rise to the top, and his Collinsville Regional Championship run was just absolutely amazing as well. And so incredibly skilled at the game, even though he just joined a couple years ago, and I think it should be inspiration for people watching at home. If you can start playing VGC and get very good very quickly if you put in the work. And so looking to add another big title to his list of accomplishments here.
Yeah, over on, let's take a look at his team one more time, just to, make sure that we're familiar with this before we jump into the match. And the interesting thing that I find about this team is, we have seen a lot of Zacian Kyogre, but I feel like Zacian Kyogre with the double Intimidate combination of that Incineroar and that Landorus Therian is something new for this weekend. We've certainly seen double Intimidate a lot in the past, but I feel like this is the first time we've seen it in this format in Series 12.
Yeah, I think a lot of players, we actually even saw it as a lead a fair amount yesterday with Colin Higher on stream. And so, Andrew's team here is just some of the strongest Pokemon in the format. It generally revolves around maxing Landorus or Kyogre, just getting a lot of value out of that. Zacian is just, one of the strongest, if not the strongest restricted Pokemon in the format. What will be really interesting in this matchup, particularly in my opinion, is the Grimmsnarl, because it is the Trick Iron Ball variant. And so not only is it valuable to remove items, but it's also valuable to, slow down opposing Pokemon, and that Speed Drop applies immediately. So I think that's actually going to be a super important Pokemon in this matchup.
Let's take a look at Austin's side of the field and get familiar with his accomplishments. Also that Sizzlipede just hanging out there on the desk. Top 16 in Players Cup 4, which was my personal Players Cup, but I'm a little bit biased on that one. But also a bit of a newer player, and it's really exciting to see him do so well and have this breakout performance here in person, because it's very different playing in person at a regional in the hall compared to at home, where you can wear your favorite pajamas, your fuzzy socks, and have that nice comfort, I guess, there to console you if you need it.
Yeah, definitely. I think what's really cool about seeing these players go up against each other is that they're relatively newer to the scene, as you can see by their achievements, and I love that, right? And so once again, VGC has been around for over a decade now, almost a decade and a half, and it's always great to see new faces come up and rise up to the top. And so I'm sure Austin is happy to just have made it this far, but I'm sure he also wants to go for a major victory, as he's so close at this point.
Definitely, and his team will certainly help him do that, as it's a bit of an innovative take on that Sun team that we've seen do so well. Still has that Groudon and Charizard together, but Calyrex Shadow Rider making an appearance as well, and it looks like the Gastrodon was dropped in favor of a Venusaur.
Yeah, I think the Calyrex, a really strong Pokemon in the format. What's interesting about it is it's not often a very strong Dynamax option because it's so frail and, is 4 times weak to Dark, but it's really speedy, and just having fast Astral Barrage pressure as well as Will-O-Wisp is really valuable. And then once again, Unnerve is actually really valuable because there's so many resist berries. In fact, if you look at Changjun Peng's winning team from the Salt Lake City Regional Championships, that team had Charty Berry on Charizard as well as Shuka Berry on Incineroar. And so Calyrex Shadow Rider is a way to actually get rid of the berries and basically make items useless on certain Pokemon, right? And so the team here actually has a lot of max options between Groudon, Charizard, and Venusaur, but I think, you're typically going to see Charizard or Venusaur max, and then as always, Grimmsnarl is a big question mark. What kind of set is it running? Dual screens is very common with Light Clay on teams like this, and so yeah, Calyrex can be used for early support with Will-O-Wisp and can also close out games with Astral Barrage, and that can be really scary.
Yeah, and I think that's the unique thing to keep an eye on, especially in the matchup between, this Kyogre Zacian and Austin's team. The fact that the Calyrex Shadow Rider could be used initially to, set up a Will-O-Wisp on that Zacian, go for some early damage, and then just, take a little break in the back of Austin's party, and then come back at the end to seal the deal with some really fast Astral Barrages. It's a very unique support Pokemon in the sense that it has just enough support to support well, but then it also has enough offensive pressure to just completely steamroll if given the opportunity.
Absolutely. I think as these players go into team preview here, the things I'm looking out for are, who's maxing, right? And so for Andrew's side, I think Landorus T is a very, very strong option. It's solid into Charizard and Venusaur, and it's not bad into Groudon, especially if you intimidate it. I think Andrew's going to definitely prioritize the Grimmsnarl here because Trick and Iron Ball is really valuable. And from Austin's end, I think Venusaur is a really critical Pokemon, and there it is coming out on the field.
Yeah, finally a Venusaur here for you, Aaron. Right at the lead of this top 8, our first game of the top 8 here this morning. Venusaur and Grimmsnarl out on the field for Austin, and the Incineroar and Kyogre out for Andrew Ding.
So Andrew, willing to actually lead Kyogre immediately just to put on offensive pressure. It can be a little bit scary to lead it because if Austin, leads the Groudon, then you might actually lose the Weather War. So Austin going for Grim and Venu here. Incin now has the potential to go for something like a Fake Out plus a Water Spout, but you really want to trade Kyogre like that, right? And so we are going to just see a Gigantamax, I think, to start off the game. Venusaur here in a great position to just go for a Vine Lash. You're not at risk of getting knocked out by other Pokemon right now.
And as we've seen throughout this season, having that Vine Lash and that residual damage up on the field is going to give Austin a early advantage, putting these Pokemon closer to the amount of damage they need to take in order to get one-hit knockouts instead of two-hit knockouts. And really going to do a lot of damage to this Kyogre as well. But Kyogre also going for that Dynamax, possibly trying to use that bulk to withstand the G-Max Vine Lash.
Yeah, it's actually really interesting to see the speed interaction there as Kyogre actually moves after the Venusaur. Both of these Pokemon are Pokemon that, are close in terms of speed tiers. Kyogre's a little bit faster, but they can be trained in so many different ways. So that's actually a really big deal in the matchup alone.
And a light screen from that Grimmsnarl will mean whatever attack Kyogre is using this turn will not be as effective. Venusaur not going for the Vine Lash, instead Max Quake to boost the special defense of Austin's side of the field even further, which is a great opportunity, I think, for this Venusaur to just get that longevity it needs to stay on the field and pick up those knockouts. A Max Geyser not going to do a lot of damage to this Grimmsnarl, but will be a two-hit knockout, which is important to keep an eye on, as a parting shot will end the turn and give Andrew the opportunity to send something in that maybe can handle this Venusaur a little bit better.
Yeah, I think Zacian here is just such a good switch in right now. Pressures with Behemoth Blade. Critically, Grimmsnarl doesn't feint, so it actually will be able to get another screens up, potentially, just go for a Reflect here. You could go for speed control as well, something like a Thunder Wave or a Scary Face onto either Pokemon. So a lot of options here. The Max Quake, nice to deal with the Kyogre. Doesn't, help as much against the Zacian here. And, Andrew actually prioritizing Kyogre over Landorus T here. Kyogre is also really strong just with Geyser across the board. But yeah, Grimmsnarl is going to start this with a Reflect.
Reflect will make sure that this Behemoth Blade will allow, I think, Venusaur to take this. Behemoth Blade is one of those moves where it does double damage to the Dynamax Pokemon, but because Reflect just halves that again, you end up with this interesting equation that gives Venusaur this opportunity to get that Vine Lash down. Not going to do a lot of damage to this Kyogre, but more importantly, going to set up the residual damage that will start adding up in between turns. Max Geyser from this Kyogre will connect with that Grimmsnarl and knock it out.
Yeah, I was curious if, Kyogre like Max Hailstorm there had the ability to KO Venusaur with the special defense boost and with the light screen up. So Venusaur hangs on for a little bit longer. Now if you're Austin, this actually allows you to go into, say, your Groudon, set up the Sun, now allow Venusaur to outspeed both Pokemon on the opposing side. But so far, I think, Andrew's done a pretty solid job playing around it. One of the scary things you have to consider is like the late game Calyrex Shadow Rider, but this is why Andrew bringing that Incineroar here really, really critical. I'm also curious what his last Pokemon is. I was expecting to play a more Grimmsnarl Landorus-centric strategy, but looks like he's willing to just max Kyogre in front of Venusaur, saying, okay, Vine Lash does okay damage, but you're not going to knock me out, and so I'm willing to take that trade-off.
Yeah, Kyogre, though, I think forced to go for Max Geyser this turn if Andrew's concerned about the weather. For now, Max Quake into that Zacian will bring it down just below half of its health, so not too much damage there. Will give Venusaur and this Groudon another special defense boost, which means this Kyogre is just really going to struggle to find damage this turn. A Behemoth Blade from the Zacian will connect with the Venusaur on Austin's side of the field and pick up that knockout. So that speed control from the Sun, giving it an opportunity to get that one last attack in. And we'll have to see how Austin is going to use this Groudon now. It will survive this Max Geyser, but it will also lose the Sun in the process. So you have to imagine You just maybe Precipice Blades and hope for the best at this point.
Yeah, and the idea is to bring out Calyrex and try to sweep with it, but I think Austin's lost a lot of resources and hasn't gotten enough damage off across the board. So there is the Precipice Blades, as you mentioned, going to connect onto both, going to knock out Zacian, not going to knock out Kyogre. So Austin now presumably should bring out the Calyrex. I'm very curious to see what Andrew's last Pokemon is, because if it's actually that Rillaboom, Grassy Glide is just incredible here, right? You can just easily knock out the Groudon with it. But one thing you have to, worry about is the potential, late game Calyrex Shadow Rider sweep, right? So now Calyrex is able to come out. You are able to just click the Astral Barrage immediately, and so that can just knock out the Kyogre. Kyogre here could maybe opt to Protect, for example, and then Incineroar could go for a Dark-type attack onto the Calyrex Shadow Rider slot. So in the end, though, Andrew is able to win the Weather Worn. He still has one final Pokemon in the back, and so that final Pokemon will be really critical.
Exactly. I think that it's nice for Austin that the Calyrex Shadow Rider is essentially guaranteed a special attack boost, assuming the Kyogre doesn't protect this turn or switch out. But unfortunately, Calyrex is really going to struggle to find damage against this Incineroar too. I know sometimes they run Mud Shot in order to get ground type damage against an Incineroar, but I don't think we've seen that revealed yet. And even then, you have to imagine with the Intimidate on that Groudon especially, that this Incineroar will be able to take at least one round of attacks.
Yeah, and the switch there to make sure there is no special attack boost. So there's actually the Grimmsnarl on the back. I think Grimm actually also very strong here because Andrew does have Foul Play on it. So it's one of those unique scenarios where instead of leading Grimmsnarl, you actually use it in the back because it's a late, actually a decent late game sweeper. But that's a huge Swords Dance there from Groudon, boosting its attack, and now Precipice Blades pressure is incredible in this end game. And great play by Austin there, does not get baited into going for an Astral Barrage, will allow it to survive, and now you can click Precipice Blades. But what's also critical here is there is Trick on the Grimmsnarl, right? So you can potentially trick the Iron Ball into either Pokemon here. If you trick it onto the Groudon, then Groudon will move slow. It will be slower. Alternatively, you can actually just trick it onto like Calyrex and then use like Kyogre to come out, stall out the Vine Lash, and then just use a Spread Water type attack to ideally KO both.
Yeah, it's a very strong Pokemon as your last Pokemon, which is something different. Normally when we see Grimmsnarl, I feel like people lead it first. You set up screens, you let it get knocked out, kind of like what we saw from Austin. But Andrew showcasing that he's very comfortable with this slower style of play with Grimmsnarl, and he has the tools needed to win the game from that Pokemon.
Yeah, so we'll see, if Grimmsnarl opts to go for the trick here. The other question is then, can Kyogre KO the Calyrex Shadow Rider in one hit, right? Like, the goal is, because right now you have to worry about Precipice Blade. So there is the trick. Let's see who it goes on to.
We'll see who's going to be holding an Iron Ball at the end of this turn. It's going to be that Calyrex, and loses a Focus Sash, which means it's very possible Throat Chop will be enough to pick up that knockout. But Precipice Blades with the double knockout, that Swords Dance already paying off in Kyogre's favor. Kyogre will be able to move faster than that Calyrex now because of that Iron Ball, but it's only going to have one opportunity to attack. Its health is so low. You have to rely on Origin Pulse if you have it, and then even then, that move is just not that accurate at all.
Yeah, so the first question is, does the Origin Pulse connect? And the second one is, does it KO the Calyrex, right? The rain is still up, and oh wow.
We see a forfeit.
So I guess, yeah, not confident on getting the knockout there. That might also indicate Kyogre just doesn't have Origin Pulse, because if you have it there, I think you just go for it, right?
Yeah.
And so I think Swords Dance was the game changer here, right? Andrew kind of just actually ran out of steam, and the late game combination of Groudon just, because Landers or Rillaboom didn't come out into this matchup, Andrew brought 4 Pokemon that were all really weak to Groudon essentially in the late game, and because he had got so much damage on the Kyogre, Austin put himself in a position where the Kyogre just couldn't threaten with late game damage. And so yeah, I mean, you have to assume there's no Origin Pulse otherwise, right? That is just the move that you click there.
Yeah, I think the interesting thing to note as well is, going into this tournament, a lot of Groudon were running Assault Vest. People would just stack up those Intimidates on them in order to mitigate their damage, and knowing that Austin's Groudon has access to Swords Dance just completely changes that matchup. Not only do you have to worry about these Intimidates being lost in the process, but you have to assume as well that Groudon has access to Protect, which a lot of times if you're using Rillaboom to sort of counter Groudon, you just assume, okay, Assault Vest, no Protect, I can fire off Grassy Glide whenever I want. But that is definitely not an option for Andrew now. Yeah,
and so Landers T is the Pokemon I was talking about previously, right? I think Grimm, Landers, Kyogre, Zacian is a really interesting 4 for Andrew to bring. I think the main reasons he might not want to bring it is because there's Intimidate on the Incineroar, there's potential Will-O-Wisp from Calyrex, and Venusaur with its weakness policy, especially with the Reflect from Grimmsnarl, can also be a major problem. And so for those reasons, I think that it was clear to me that Andrew had a game plan in Game 1 and was trying to play around all of those, right? But in the end, this Swords Dance Groudon was just way too powerful, and especially under screens, right? You look at how Andrew can deal with Groudon in the late game, your best bets to KO it are either Rillaboom or a healthy Kyogre, right? And so given that Kyogre likely doesn't have Origin Pulse, that actually changes this matchup drastically because it means you have to kind of conserve it a little bit better for the late game.
Venusaur and Grimmsnarl once again the lead for Austin, who is 1 game away from moving on to the top 4 here in Indianapolis. And Andrew mixing things up. There's the Landorus Therian and the Incineroar alongside of it.
So Landorus here obviously a lot better against the Venusaur, but one of the questions is, can it knock out Venusaur, right? Venusaur can invest in bulk. You can run just a minimal amount of bulk will actually allow you to survive a Jolly max airstream like 100% of the time. Venusaur also carries a Copa Berry occasionally to cover for like Life Orb, max airstreams, for example. And so, Incineroar here can either go for a Fake Out on a Grimmsnarl or a Parting Shot onto the Venusaur. Landorus could choose to Dynamax immediately, but the question is, are you confident in getting a knockout, right? Like, even if you Fake Out plus Max Quake or Max Airstream into the Grimmsnarl slot, if Grimmsnarl survives, it's a disaster because then it can just set up a Reflect the subsequent turn. And so, yeah, it's scary to feel confident Dynamaxing here, right? And as a result, I think we're actually not going to see a Max.
Yeah, and seeing this Venusaur go for the 2nd Dynamax in this set, I think goes to show just how powerful Venusaur is in this matchup. It's okay if the Venusaur gets knocked out after a couple of turns, because really all it needs is time to set up that G-Max Vine Lash, and that's enough of a threat to make it worthwhile. You also see this Groudon.
Oh.
All right, well, that's interesting. We're seeing a 2nd slower Dynamax than the Venusaur on Andrew's side of the field, and there's only 2 Pokemon that could be.
I'm surprised that this Landorus is slower. I'm really surprised.
Yeah, that is a great piece of information for both these trainers going into this game too. Normally you see Landorus with max speed investment, so it should be able to outspeed Venusaur in the sun, but in this case, it does not. Reflect will go up on the field, and Venusaur will move first with that G-Max Vine Lash. Not going to do much damage to that Landorus, but will get that residual chip going for the next few turns. Max Airstream from Landorus will connect with the Venusaur, does not pick up the knockout thanks to that Reflect. Will give a speed boost to both of these Pokemon, which I guess now Landorus does outspeed the Venusaur, presumably.
Oh!
But there's the reveal of the weakness policy on the Venusaur. So, this last attack, because it is able to hold on through that Flare Blitz, is going to do a ton of damage.
A lot of interesting things about that turn. I mean, first of all, slower Landorus Therian form. It took the Vine Lash really well, so you can assume that it's the Assault Vest item here. Venusaur also is the weakness policy, and I like Andrew's decision to say, you know what, I'm just going to double up onto what's actually threatening me with offense. Grimmsnarl can set up screens, but doesn't do very much beyond that, right? And so, Scary Face here, great way to get some more speed control. And so, it's going to slow down Landorus, allowing Venusaur to potentially get another attack off, and it will move before the Incineroar here.
Activates the Shucka Berry with that Max Quake, but thanks to that weakness policy boost, this is still going to do a ton of damage. Just barely missing that knockout, though, on the Incineroar. Will boost up the special defense of both these Pokemon by 1 stage, which will help out a lot, assuming that Kyogre's lurking around in the back of Andrew's party. Incineroar going for a Parting Shot into that Venusaur to try and mitigate some of those attack boosts, but you have to wonder, I don't think you necessarily send the Kyogre in here. And that's why you see the Zacian reveal from Andrew, so make possible adjustment. If that Grimmsnarl is still the last Pokemon in his party like we saw in Game 1, it could be that Landorus present instead of the Kyogre. Max Airstream, though, will secure the knockout on that Venusaur and give that Zacian a speed boost, which also could be critical as well.
Yeah, speed boost is valuable, though we know now that the Grimmsnarl does indeed have the Scary Face. You can, further drop Zacian speed. What's really interesting here is kind of like the endgame scenario, right? Like, you would expect Andrew to bring Kyogre just because it's like, would you really not bring it into a Groudon matchup? But if it's Kyogre, things could actually get a little bit scarier because suddenly Astro Barrage looks really good, right? You can just spam it. And the other thing here is that you know, Calyrex Shadow Rider can just snowball really, really quickly. So it's actually going to be Groudon coming out first here. Does have the potential to angle for something like a Swords Dance, or you could just quick press this Blades. The other upside for Austin throughout this match is that, you know, you get so much value out of G-Max Vine Lash hitting everything, but this time around I think Andrew in a much better offensive position, and if you can just get a knockout onto Grimmsnarl, then you'll win the Weather War. The fact that you have an early lead means that it's a little bit easier to win the Weather War in the long term in this game.
Yeah, and winning the Weather War, of course, is basically your priority when you're playing Groudon versus Kyogre in particular. You know, we know that Kyogre doesn't have access to Origin Pulse, presumably from that previous game. So if the sun were up, that would just really hurt its damage output overall. At least if it's able to get the rain, if it has access to Thunder, that could be another way for it to deal damage if it came down to 1v1 Shadow Rider versus the Kyogre.
Yeah, I think here Scary Face plus Precious Blades is a really scary combination, and there it is to start. And, you know, like the thing is, how good is Zacian at this point, right? Maybe you're willing to sacrifice it to get the free switch into the Kyogre, or you're still faster.
He's still faster thanks to that Airstream boost. Just -1 speed is enough, and that Behemoth Blade connecting with the Grimmsnarl and securing the knockout. So Austin down to his last 2 Pokemon here. Landorus Therian also given the opportunity to attack, using Airstream to get that speed back up to neutral on that Zacian and deal a nice amount of chip to the Groudon. Big question here I have is this Groudon going to go for a Sword Stance this turn like we saw from Andrew Austin in Game 1? And it is. So now this Groudon is twice as scary, in my opinion, than it was previously.
Yeah, it's scary, but what's interesting is, you know, how do you still get to a point where you win the game, right? Because this time around, Andrew has conserved the Kyogre a lot better than he did in the first game, and so now a single Water Spout will just KO the Groudon, you know, even through Light Screen, for example. So Calyrex is the last one. One of the interesting things that we didn't see in the previous game is like the Calyrex full moveset, right? I was thinking, oh, if you have Trick Room, that would be an interesting move to go in this end game, especially to allow like Groudon to outspeed everything. But also maybe the Groudon actually outspeeds the Kyogre. That's the other interesting dynamic here, where Andrew seems to be investing in a lot of bulk on his team, but as a result giving up on some speed. And you saw that in Landorus in that turn 1 interaction. We were both really surprised that it Dynamaxed after Venusaur, but that actually maybe helped out Andrew, because it, you know, if it moved before Venusaur would have gotten the Airstream off. And so now you're in a position where you can pressure with just Astral Barrage and Precipice Blades. Will-O-Wisp pressure is also quite strong here, but it's actually going to be the Side Shock reveal from Calyrex onto the Landorus.
Zacian protecting itself so that the Calyrex's Focus Sash would have been activated if Andrew was able to attack, but that Side Shock critical hit, knocking out the Landorus Therian. As a result, this Groudon will not be able to attack this turn or deal any damage, but this poor Zacian, definitely within range of getting knocked out by Precipice Blades, and you have to wonder, it's getting close to that magic number for Astral Barrage as well.
Yeah, I'm really curious about the damage calc there from Psyshock onto Landorus, because Psyshock actually ignores the Assault Vest there, and if you don't get that knockout, then Landorus can retaliate back with an attack, and then maybe it actually feints from Vine Lash and denies the special attack boost onto the Calyrex. The problem right now for Andrew is now Calyrex gets a special attack boost, and it can just click Astral Barrage onto everything. You don't even have to care about Groudon fainting with the Focus Sash on the Calyrex Shadow Rider. And so then one of the other questions is, can Kyogre take 2+1 Astral Barrages? It also has Life Orb, so you have to include some Life Orb chip there, and then the Incineroar in the back, you know, it doesn't actually take +1 Astral Barrages that well either, and, you know, can't even use a Recovery Berry. You know, we know it doesn't have one, but even if it did, right, it would just be irrelevant here. And so this is the power of late game Calyrex Shadow Rider, and there's just the Astral Barrage. Does it get the knockout onto Zacian at +1?
It's gonna be close, it's going, and it's gone. Zacian knocked out by that Astral Barrage. Kyogre down to below half its health, and another Grimnay special attack boost, ensuring that this Calyrex Shadow Rider is going to be the big damage dealer for this match. Ice Beam into the Groudon will secure a knockout, but Calyrex Shadow Rider, a ghost-type Pokemon, cannot be faked out. That Kyogre definitely within range of getting knocked out this turn. If Incineroar is able to hold on and go for a Throat Chop, there's still the Focus Sash.
Yeah, I think at this point it's too late. A single Astral Barrage win. So one play I was thinking about from Andrew's end, actually, I'm not even sure. I'm not sure really what you could do in that position. I think this is just the power of late game Calyrex Shadow Rider. Like, Austin positioned it perfectly. And so the Side Shock onto Landorus was what really, I think, had a major impact on this game, because a single special attack boost allowed Calyrex to just snowball out of control. And so Andrew's Landorus is also actually very bulky, so I'd actually expect it to survive the Side Shock there. And if it does survive, I think it's a completely different game. But this is the power of late game Calyrex Shadow Rider. I think, you know, Andrew making a good adjustment, bringing the Landorus T instead, and focusing